Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. Where's My Jetpack is a web series about the technology we were promised as kids, what we actually got, and what's coming next. When we were kids, today was the future. Star Trek: The Next Generation promised us little glowing rectangles we could carry around with us that contain the sum total knowledge of humanity. But what we actually got was something that spies on us every single day. Meet Cory Doctorow. He spent his entire career writing science fiction that warns us about the future. It's won him the Prometheus Award 3 times, more than past winners George Orwell, Robert Heinlein, and Neil Stephenson. And Doctorow puts his money where his pen is. He's also a digital rights activist, actively working with the Electronic Frontier Foundation to prevent the futures about which he writes. His latest book, Attack Surface, is written from the perspective of Masha Maximov, a hacker working for a digital mercenary spy agency used by the US government to spy on its own citizens, and by dictators wanting to clamp down on revolutionaries. And while the book is science fiction, the science within it is fact. Almost all the technologies Doctorow writes about are actively being used against us today. So how do we as citizens of a surveillance society not lose hope about the future? And what does he teach his own daughter about the little glowing rectangles we all carry around all day that spy on us through that day? The answers to those questions and more coming up in part 1 of our 2-part conversation. But first, some of the cool stuff we posted to My Jetpack CA and a social media friendly 2-minute and 20-second video that we desperately hope means you're going to subscribe, tweet, reshare, click the little bell, all that nonsense. Rich Lyons of the Apple design team tweeted, "I don't know what they're smoking over at Hyundai, but it's working." This is the Hyundai Grandeur concept from 2021 and a definite throwback to the 1980s. Honoring the 35th anniversary of the original Grandeur, it features a fully retro cabin with the modern twist of a vertical center console screen that begs to be used in the next Men in Black sequel. Going back to 1975, Hyundai returns to the pony's roots with a concept based on the first-gen 67-horsepower compact car unveiled at its studio in Busan, Korea. It boasts a retro-futuristic interior that would make Michael Knight jealous, parametric pixel lights, and fender-mounted exterior mirrors. The only question is, with Apple rumored to be working on its own vehicle, why is a member of the company's design studio browsing concept car designs? If you're like me, and I know I am, you're into virtual reality. But if you're waiting for a Ready Player One style oasis with a full bodysuit, keep waiting. The Meta Quest 2 holds a monopoly on consumer-grade virtual reality, and the chief technology officer at Meta is putting the kibosh on any thoughts of coming up with a suit to make you feel in real life what you experience in virtual life. MixedNews.com quotes Andrew Bosworth as saying he doesn't think full bodysuits will ever catch on, claiming visual and auditory stimuli make up 80% of the human experience, and quote, "That's enough for Meta. Both we and Wade Watts will have to wait until 2045 after all." The tech world has a phrase that goes, "First mover advantage is not always an advantage," and Eagly has crunched the numbers to prove it. From 1993 to the year 2000, America Online was the dominant platform for accessing the internet before it was a thing. But as their work mining SEMrush, Google Analytics, and Statista reveal, curated content on a closed platform can't hold a candle to the open standards of the World Wide Web. After Yahoo's launch in 1995, it took only 5 years for AOL to become irrelevant. But Yahoo's dominance only lasted 5 more years, and it's been a Google world ever since. Cory, great speaking with you again. Thank you for joining us.
It's always great to talk to you, Michael. I've known you now for something like 30 years, so it's...
Oh, so yeah, you just aged us both.
Yeah, indeed.
I want to begin by talking about how much Attack Surface is science and how much of it is fiction. Masha Maximov has to go through extensive lengths to protect herself and her technology from intrusion. She puts clear nail polish on the screws of her laptop to avoid an evil maid attack, sneaking spyware onto her machine while she's in the hotel swimming pool. She blocks her USB ports. She doesn't own an iPhone with iCloud, but a smartphone that's capable of running a specialized operating system that's hardened against intrusion. And she constantly has to update it. She works for a hacker-for-hire mercenary organization with tech that rivals even a government spy agency. So it all sounds like science fiction, but it's really science fact, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that all of that stuff, those are all real countermeasures that exist. There are people who deploy them. They tend to be less perfect than they would like to be. That is a general issue that arises whenever you are contending with really powerful adversary, where you don't know if they're ever going to attack you, but if they do, the consequences would be very terrible. Think of how hard it is for TSA agents to remain vigilant for things in our bags, right? They just, this is why every time they do a red team exercise and try and put a gun or a bomb in a bag and put it through an airport X-ray, like 95% of the time it just sails through, because they're really good at doing routine things like taking away your water bottles, because they practice that all day long. But these, black swan events that are really awful, but that almost never crop up, are things that they don't have any practice at. And by the same token, people who are worried about someone attacking the hardware of their laptop while it's out of their control, those people end up mostly not having that happen to them. And so they have to be perfect in order to prevent it from happening. And their adversary just has to catch one time when they're not perfect in order to attack them successfully. And I think one of the lessons of the story is that all of that operational security and spycraft and stuff, it only takes you so far. And that really the way that you get shut of a powerful state adversary that wants to do something illegitimate to you is to reform or overthrow the state. It's not to maintain sort of eternal vigilance against an adversary who can run, three 8-hour shift teams against you while there's just little old you getting tired and cranky and hangry and all the rest of it.
Right. All it takes is one slip up, I think, is one of the key points in the book that Masha is trying to express to her activist friends.
Yeah. So she, they represent the two poles of that, right? So on the one hand, her activist friends are the people who have embarked on the project of bettering society, making the state more accountable to the people in it, and also preventing private contractors from supercharging the power of the state to attack everyday individuals. And Masha, by a different token, she wants to, be an adversarial super spy, an individual who is an army of one, and who, by dint of her technical knowledge and her vigilance, is able to see off the threat from that powerful adversary. And each of them thinks that the other is doing something that is ultimately a fool's errand. And both of them have a point, right? It is a very long-run, difficult and fraught project to make the state better. It is also not really realistic to say that you can only be free and you can only have fairness and an even-handed treatment if you are a kind of vigilant prepper who does nothing but paint nail polish on the screws of your laptop to stop people from breaking into it.
So, yes, you are a digital rights activist. I know you're a Linux laptop guy. You don't own an iPhone. And when I invited you, I offered you a calendar invite for this conversation. You're like, no. And later I'm like, I can understand. You don't want something sitting on a cloud somewhere with your name on it. So to what extent do you harden yourself against attack? How much is Masha imitating your life?
She's certainly more aspirational than realistic for me, I have to say. I have the complex and common operational security parameter that I have a family. And so since privacy and security are a team sport, I have to contend with the fact that I'm on a local area network with a 14-year-old who really likes TikTok. And so there are devices running TikTok on my network all the time. And I am just not capable of having the kind of security that she is, because I'm not an island. I am in a group. In the same way that the activists that Masha is in tension with in the novel want to be able to work together. And in order to work together, they have to make some sacrifices that individuals working on their own do not. But what they get by dint of working together is they can do more than one person can do on their own. That is the whole point of working together, is to be literally superhuman, right? To transcend the limits of one person.
So Masha software builds digital dossiers on her targets. How confident are you that you are or not somewhere on a government server with a digital dossier?
Oh, well, I know there is, because I just became a U.S. citizen. So I I mean, I've been driving around all day to get this, my first U.S. passport. So I guarantee you, old Uncle Sam's got a pretty thick file on me, because before that I had various kinds of work visa and then a green card, and so I had to voluntarily hand over just a shocking amount of information. But, as we keep getting reminded, whenever there's a new population scale threat, like, say, the repeal of Roe versus Wade and the threat of vigilante action against people who seek abortions, there are so many private data brokers out there, and the wall between them and the state is actually thinner than the wall between the state's own surveillance apparatus and its analysts. Right. The whole point of the Department of Homeland Security and the reforms after 9/11 was to de-silo state information, and it was only sort of modestly successful. And to the extent that it worked, it exposed government data to all kinds of security risks, because they're trying to share information between agencies, so they're setting up new information flows, and those are new seams where information can leak out of. So you have the Office of Personnel Management, who, like, the people who write the paychecks for everyone who works for the federal government, and who also do security clearance for everyone who works for the federal government. They breached a couple of million records of Americans who had sought and who had received security clearance. And to get security clearance, you have to tell the government everything that could be used to blackmail you. So it's literally all of your most sensitive information. And it was breached, and it's widely believed to have been breached to the People's Liberation Army, to the Chinese military. And so everyone in America with security clearance has had their data breached. So, it's stuff like that that has actually made the government kind of pull back a little from its goal of de-siloing its information. Those imperatives are not in place in the private sector. You have Equifax doxing every man, woman, and child in America because they are an almost entirely unregulated data broker that, acts as a credit rater. And you have all kinds of shadowy private actors who gather data from your car telemetry, from the apps on your phone, and so on. And, they trade that data very promiscuously among each other and with commercial clients, but they sell it to the government for pennies. And so, you have ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, you have many other law enforcement agencies who, rather than going through the tedious business of acquiring a surveillance technology or device, seeking a warrant for it, getting the warrant, placing it, collecting data with it, collecting it, gathering that data, all they do is, like, call up scumbag data brokers are us and say, tell me all the places Michael Hainsworth's car has been for the last year. And they get that for like $11 in a CSV spreadsheet. It's so much simpler than heading out to a federal courthouse and convincing a judge that you should be able to plant a bug on your car.
Well, you've brought up an interesting point in that there's been a lot of pushback lately about not necessarily data brokers, but these mercenary organizations, these independent companies. The idea that a government agency wants to buy these companies so that they can absorb their capabilities. And there's been a big pushback against that. Help me understand that, because I'm wondering which is worse, having an independent mercenary organization out there, or having it at least in the hands of what we would generally refer to as a friendly government than, say, a dictatorship.
Or at least an entity that's notionally democratically accountable, in which hypothetically there is oversight of spy agencies, although we keep finding out over and over again that the spy agencies are operating almost entirely without adult supervision and just running around winging it. So, I mean, these cyber mercenary companies are all over the place. A lot of them have some nexus with government already. So the NSO group is a very notorious one. They've been caught over and over again hacking European Union commissioners, Chinese or Spanish state officials, anti-sugar activists from Mexico. Really, like, no target too small. And most notoriously, they were part of the intelligence operation that lured the journalist Jamal Khashoggi to a very grisly dismemberment and death in the Turkish embassy, or in the Saudi embassy in Turkey, in Istanbul. And they're widely understood to have been a kind of outgrowth of the Israeli intelligence services. They got absorbed by a private equity company. They are now, facing some sanctions and maybe shopping themselves around. They have proven themselves to be remarkably reckless and remarkably without scruple about who they serve, and incredibly dishonest about what they do. When Citizen Lab, which is an independent academic digital human rights organization at the University of Toronto, investigated them, they had an Mossad spy who worked for the same spy agency, the private spy agency that Harvey Weinstein hired to discredit his accusers. Someone who worked for that entity came out to Toronto and tried to entrap one of the Citizen Lab employees who got wise, called the Associated Press and had them sit at the next table at the restaurant where they were meeting and take surreptitious pictures and, get a copy of the whole conversation before finally springing it on this guy who then ran out of the restaurant. It was quite hilarious. I think that they have, by their actions, really proven themselves to be unfit for service to a state. You might ask yourself the same question about any other kind of mercenary. If we don't bring in, Al-Qaeda headsmen who can lop off the head of a journalist with a single stroke of a sword, who will they work for? Wouldn't it be better to have them working for us? And I think the right answer is, if we can catch those people, we should put them in jail. And if we can't catch them, we shouldn't hire them. We should put them on a most wanted list. And I think that's really the case with these cyber mercenaries as well.
So let's explain some of the science fact in attack surface. In 2018, Toronto police were caught using a Stingray device 2 years after they promised they wouldn't. MC catchers factor heavily in attack surface.
Yeah, so, our cell phones were not designed to maintain our privacy. They don't have what is called privacy by design, which is like a part of the design process where you sit down right at the beginning and you say, what are the information flows, what are the personal risks to the people who use this? And it's not like you'll be perfect, but you start from the beginning with the idea that privacy is something you want to bake into the project rather than adding on after the fact. And mobile services never had that. The first digital mobile standards were kind of a hurried affair and a gold rush. And, there are always persistent rumors that maybe spy agencies came in and whispered in the ear of companies like Motorola and said, it would be really better if you were to just not think about anonymity or privacy when you're designing this, because it'd be nice to be able to keep track of it. Whether or not that happened, I think that there's very good evidence that happened with the first Wi-Fi standard with 802.11a, that there was a deliberate act of sabotage to weaken the encryption on WPA, the wireless privacy standard that was in that was very quickly broken. And subsequent versions of wireless security were armored against that and were undertaken in a way where there was enough public scrutiny through the whole process that it would have been very hard to subvert it. I think because there was a sense among the the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is the standards body that standardizes 802.11, that they just couldn't afford a future in which people didn't trust this stuff. But mobile phones, because they're kind of accreted. You have these standards sitting on standards, and they go back all the way to 2G and 1G, and you have old towers and old infrastructure. There are a lot of seams and cracks in them, and it's very hard to retrofit security on them. And what that has come to mean is that you can build a little briefcase-sized device called an IMI catcher or an IMSI catcher, or sometimes called a Stingray, sometimes called a cell site simulator. There's a lot of different names for this thing, but it's a fake cell phone tower. And what it does is it emits a low-power radio beacon, and when cell phones get near it, it says, "Hey, I'm a cell phone tower. Who are you? Let me tell you if I can provide any services to you." Because that's how the wireless protocol works. That's how your phone can hop from tower to tower. Whenever there's a tower that it comes within range, and the tower says, "Hey, who are you? Who are you? Tell me who you are, and I'm going to figure out whether or not you are able to access services for me." And then the cell phone goes, "Oh, well, here are the 5 towers that are willing to offer me service. Which one has got the least load and is closest to me?" I mean, it's not a terrible system on its face, but because you have this crucial "who are you" step, any tower can pop up and say, "Hey, who are you?" And your cell phone will go, "Why, I'm Michael Hainsworth's cell phone." And it can just store that data. It can say, "Sorry, I've never heard of you, can't help you, move along." And with these relatively low-cost devices, you can do things like enumerate every person at a demonstration who's carrying a mobile phone. You can do what the city of Anaheim did. and also the city of Baltimore, which is you can buy a device called a dirt box that fits under a low-flying plane or drone, and you can fly it over the city for months at a time, circling the city, gathering the movements of every person with a mobile phone that is line of sight to a low-flying plane, and just gather all that data all at once. Now, there are other ways that people do that through other kinds of data, but that was a way that law enforcement agencies were able to do this. These cell site simulators, they were originally developed under a cloak of extreme secrecy. The company that made them, a primary military and defense contractor called Harris, they bound all the police departments and district attorneys who bought these things. They bound them to an extreme form of non-disclosure in which they agreed to lie to judges about whether or not they were using them, because they didn't want the existence of these things to be revealed. And so they would do what's called parallel construction, where a cop would want to spy on your phone. They would work to get one of these Stingrays deployed. They would follow you around using the Stingray, or gather information about who arrived at a location using the Stingray. And then they would do something like have a police cruiser accidentally drive past there and just turn on its lights and its siren and accidentally discover what you were up to, so that you would not know that the way that you were originally caught was with one of these cell site simulators. And there are amazing stories about how this came out. So at one point, it was pretty clear a defense attorney had a pretty good idea that this was how his client had been caught, and this was in Florida, and he was getting ready to put a cop on the stand and to subpoena records as part of discovery from the local police department. And the Department of Justice, the federal cops, raided the police department and stole their records of the cell site simulator so that they couldn't be presented in court by the cops. So when the judge said to the cops, you have to hand over all the records you have, they could say, Your Honor, we have no such records. Ultimately, the existence of Stingrays was revealed by a person who was imprisoned by one, who was sitting in the prison library obsessively trying to figure out how he had been caught. And he found these very oblique references in obscure trade journals and in public information about budget line items and so on. And he kind of reverse engineered the characteristics of this device by looking at who was selling it, who was buying it, and how it had been used against him. And that was how the word of this device's existence eventually came out.
You mentioned security as a team sport, and Masha tries to explain that to her activist friends, that it doesn't really matter if the head of a group has a secure smartphone if the underlings don't. Cascading effects frequently come up in attack surface, and it's something that I suppose we all need to be just generally thinking about, like Facebook.
Yeah, you may remember that after the Snowden revelations, there were hearings where Michael Hayden said, we kill based on metadata. We send drone strikes out based on metadata. And there is a kind of metaphysical question about what is data and what is metadata, but you can think of metadata as like an envelope and data as the letter inside the envelope. So you know when it was sent and who the return address was from and who it's to and where the postmark was and lots of other information about it, and you don't know what's inside it. And what the NSA mostly monitored and what other services mostly monitored, spy agencies mostly monitored, was metadata. And metadata had some really large advantages for conducting mass surveillance. So despite their claims that metadata was relatively harmless because it was just the, sort of the wrapping around the present, because metadata is intended to be both originated from and interpreted by computers, it is uniquely suitable to digital analysis, to computer analysis, right? All of the email that we send and receive is hard for computers to make sense of. No one knows if someone says that show was the bomb. No one knows how to write the program that can distinguish a bomb threat from someone talking like they were in Hip Hop House Party 2. And you need to get one of your scarce and expensive human beings to look at all those emails when you get a hit. Whereas the metadata is designed for and by computers. It is in a computer readable format. And so you can ingest gigantic amounts of metadata and you can look for patterns in it. So one of the patterns you can look for is organizational or institutional structure, and this is where these cascades come in. So say you know all of the metadata about a group of people and their mobile communications. So you know when a message is sent, you know when it's received, you know when another message is sent, you know how long the messages are, but you can't look at the messages. Maybe the messages are encrypted, and or maybe you just don't have enough analysts to read them all. But what you can do is you can say, hey, look, every time this guy sends an email, 7 people send 100 emails. This guy is the boss, and these 7 people are his lieutenants, and the 100 people are the shock troops, right? And you can see that in a kind of data analysis way by looking at metadata. By the same token, there's a lot of interest when people talk about information privacy and security in the idea of a burner phone, right? This is a phone that you only use for private communications. You use it very little. You never use it at home. You don't connect it to a network that's associated with you. The burner phones are extraordinarily hard to do right. Really, really hard. Like you have to buy one for cash in a store that doesn't have a camera. You have to get a SIM the same way. I mean, it's really tough. But you can identify burner phones in large data sets by looking for things like a little kind of fairy ring of 8 phones that only talk to each other and never talk to anyone else. And you can go, wait a second, these 8 people are all using burner phones to talk to each other. Because it's very rare to have 8 phones that only turn on at a set hour and always turn on in a different location and only talk to each other and then turn themselves off. And one of the things that you can do is you can say, tell me all the phones that switch off an hour before my burner phones, this ring of burner phones turns on, and also switch on again an hour later. And now you have a pool of people who are the likely suspects for the people who turn off their phones, grab their burner phones, get in their car or get on a subway or something, or get on a bicycle and go somewhere far from their home and then turn on their phone to have their burner phone conversation. And, you know, if you have enough of those burner calls in your data set, say there's a weekly meeting, well, after, you know, sort of 4 or 5 of those, the number of people whose phones switched off an hour before, switched on an hour after, all 8 times or all 10 times, it's going to be effectively just the people who are in the conspiracy. And so not only can you spot the burner phones, you can spot the non-burner phones. You can associate them with non-burner phones given a large enough data set.
Cory Doctorow is a Toronto-born, Burbank-based digital rights activist and renowned science fiction author. His latest book is Attack Surface, published by Macmillan. Still to come, part 2 of our conversation on the future of a surveillance society, including why Doctorow doesn't believe we'll ever get autonomous vehicles.
It is suicide to get into a Tesla, put it in self-driving mode, and close your eyes. Like you will kill yourself or someone else.
We'll find out how he's teaching his 14-year-old daughter to be security aware.
I spent a lot of time talking to her about it, but trying not to freak her out, because I don't want her to hate her phone. I don't want her to be scared of her phone. I mean, especially during the lockdown, you know, that was her gateway to social life as a young teenager.
And we'll learn why he's not fatalistic about the fight to retain our privacy in a world of surveillance capitalism. Get subscribed by visiting where'smyjetpack.ca to find the links to the podcast, YouTube, social media. Click the bell, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Plus, read Amber Healy's primer on the state of surveillance capitalism today. We'd appreciate it if you'd share the love on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is myjetpackca. I'm Michael Hainsworth. Thanks for joining us.